The urban planning implications of sea level rise is probably one of the biggest challenges that our nation will face in the history of our country.
And we don't really have years to waste. There are residents that are being displaced right now. And so we do need timely solutions.
No time to waste. Climate scientists say we need to act now in order to best prepare for the impacts of climate change. We take a look at the effects sea level rise is already having on housing costs and home development across South Florida. Plus, hear what experts say can be done right now to give residents a fighting chance against those rising tides. Stay with us as we dive into your South Florida. Hello and welcome. I'm Pam Giganti. Happy New Year to you and thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to your South Florida, where we choose one important topic each month that's having an impact on our local communities. We'll dive deep into that issue and take a look at it from several angles. This month, we are exploring how South Florida officials are planning for sea level rise, a threat that is coming faster than previously thought. The latest projections come from last month's annual Southeast Florida Climate Leadership Summit and show an alarming trend for the region. Data from 2015 showed a rise in sea level by up to 26 inches or roughly 2 feet. 2019 data now shows South Florida could expect a rise in sea level by up to 31 inches or about 2.5 feet by the year 2060. That's only 40 years from now. And this threat won't only affect those right along the coast. FAU urban planning expert Dr. John Rennie warns the impacts of sea level rise will be felt far beyond the beaches. He and his team are working on ways to help local governments implement the necessary plans to better protect these vulnerable areas from rising seas. There are changes, he says, need to happen now while there's still time to do it.
The urban planning implications of sea level rise is probably one of the biggest challenges that our nation will face in the history of our country.
Dr. John Rennie is an associate professor of urban and regional planning at Florida Atlantic University. His research focuses on creating sustainable and resilient cities in the face of sea level rise.
This particular map shows us the potential high model for the year 2080, only 60 years into the future. And what we see here is that the impacts of the sea level rise, which are shown in blue, are not necessarily right on the beach. In fact, we see here that the areas here, say for example in Lauderdale by the Sea, are not as impacted, and this because the ground is a bit higher as you get closer to the ocean. But the impacts are seen here on both sides of the intercoastal. On the west side of Broward County and Miami-Dade County, you could see that the sea level rise is being impacted because the water is flowing up through the Everglades and hitting the west side of our region.
As director of FAU's Center for Urban and Environmental Solutions, Dr. Rennie and his team work with local governments to come up with strategies to combat sea level rise now and in the future.
What we offer them is some targeted solutions around very specific problems. And we worked with students, we worked with outside experts and experts within FAU to present solutions to them that they can take back to their communities and be able to implement that. We also have been working on developing some innovative new tools using virtual reality, where we're basically going into communities and showing folks exactly what it would look like based on future projections. We're really finding that in our research, that showing folks what it looks like gives them a much deeper understanding, and then having that tool along with the other tools that we can use with mayors and planning directors and engineers, we're able to work with communities to present an array of options that span the short term, the medium term, and the long term. stronger seawalls and maybe roads that are raised up higher off the ground. Those are very expensive solutions, and the reality is that they only work up to a certain point. We also need to be thinking about the big picture and thinking about the mitigating strategies to reduce the amount of carbon that we emit.
As a nationally recognized expert on transportation planning, Dr. Rennie is concerned not enough is being done in the state of Florida to reduce carbon emissions, considered to be a leading cause of climate change.
It's important to be carbon neutral in the future, to say that we're going to be that, because having that goal by 2050 then puts into place a whole series of steps and policies and plans that we need to start implementing today. We need to reduce the amount of fossil fuels in our transportation system. We need to invest in public transit. We need to make our cities safer for walking and biking, and that will encourage more people to seek alternatives other than driving.
And according to climate scientists, increasing ocean water temperatures caused by carbon emissions are one of the key factors that strengthen hurricane development, a threat Dr. Rennie says could irreparably change the landscape of South Florida.
What you find is that the poor working class folks who can barely afford to live here as it is, they will evacuate, and many of them won't afford to be able to return, because what you find during the aftermath of a major disaster like a hurricane is that housing prices increase for the areas that are habitable after the disaster. And it just takes so long to rebuild housing. And I think that will be the impetus for a migration. I don't think it's going to happen naturally, where people are just going to wake up one day and say, okay, it's time to leave. It's going to happen when a major hurricane hits and neighborhoods are flooded and people can't return, and they're going to move somewhere else, and then those neighborhoods are unfortunately not going to come back. The cost of insurance or the ability to even get insurance is going to potentially be the biggest hurricane that we'll ever see hit South Florida. If insurance companies collectively decide to stop writing policies in certain areas, that is going to be an economic crisis that the individual homeowner or the individual city or mayor has no ability to overcome.
And while some of the impacts Dr. Rennie mentioned might take some time to be seen, there are impacts being felt right now in many South Florida neighborhoods, particularly in areas of Miami that are on higher ground, like Little Haiti, Liberty City, and Overtown. As developers move away from the coast to these inland areas, seeking the last affordable land in the city, residents worry climate gentrification is wiping entire communities off the map.
When we talk about certain issues, we put weight on empirical evidence more than we value anecdotes and anecdotal evidence, and that really has to change. When someone is telling you about a phenomenon, your answer shouldn't be, we're not sure. And with climate gentrification, it's been a couple years since people started describing this phenomenon. It shouldn't have taken this long to go, well, let's look into this.
We have heard from community members living in Little Haiti specifically, and also Liberty City, that they get knocks on their doors and offers to sell their home. And those offers will often be cash offers that also come with a period of time where they can have free rent in South Dade, so in Homestead, for example. So that's something that we've been hearing about a lot, the pressure to sell your home and then also to move to this lower elevation area that's more susceptible to sea level rise.
So the difference between gentrification and climate gentrification is that gentrification really only relates to housing. It is definitely harmful, but it's harmful in a way that it can tear apart the fabric of established and really important and culturally relevant neighborhoods. It does not always mean that people will be put in the path of harm. That's where climate gentrification comes in. When you're talking about climate gentrification, you're really talking about risk and level of risk and vulnerability. We know that Little Haiti sits largely 8 to 10 feet above sea level, and Homestead sits 2 to 3 feet above sea level. So yes, there's an opportunity to buy more properties and to short-term increase your value, in your net value, your assets. However, when we get another storm, when sea levels start rising enough, if anything were to ever happen to Turkey Point, Homestead residents are going to be considerably more vulnerable than Little Haiti residents.
This is years in the making of people understanding this property, the area where it's located as far as how close you are in terms of proximity to the beach, downtown, the airport. So it's a hot zone, hot location, and the climate aspect, we now know that this is high elevation. We know that when the Hurricane Irma came, you know, the beach got flooded, downtown got flooded, but TIET didn't get flooded.
We talk about climate gentrification in Miami when it comes to sea level rise, but climate gentrification could also be proximity to wildfires or an area that's prone to mudslides. So things that just put you in harm's way or moving you closer to being in harm's way.
I really think climate gentrification is just adding on a layer on top of like traditional gentrification or displacement. You know, here in Miami, climate change is probably the greatest issue that we're facing in terms of threats to existence. Caroline Lewis from Clio Institute always says climate change is a threat multiplier. It kind of adds on additional stresses onto what are already critical issues for our community.
In the history of Miami, Miami Beach has been the primary demand driver, right? Everybody wants to be close to the water, so traditionally those areas along the waterfront, including areas along the Biscayne Bay and downtown Miami, have received most of the development activity over the last 30 or 40 years. Today that's shifted a bit, and now we're seeing more northwest movement. We're seeing a lot more development activity heading towards the northwest.
So we're seeing significant redevelopment pressure across Miami's various neighborhoods. In Little Haiti, for example, between 2000 and 2013, we've seen a 70% increase in the number of households earning over $100,000 per year, and a 20% decrease in the number of rental units that are affordable to lower income households. We've mapped some of that redevelopment pressure. We're actually able to visualize it through our mapping software. So we could show you how many properties in Little Haiti, Little Havana, and Alapata that are currently owned by a company. And some of the results are really striking. In Little Haiti, for example, 22% of all single-family homes and duplexes in broader Little Haiti are owned by some type of company. To give you a sense of scale, it's only 6% countywide. So Little Haiti has more than 3 times the rate of single-family homes and duplexes owned by a company in the rest of Miami-Dade County.
The neighborhoods that are currently the case studies, if you will, for climate gentrification as a phenomenon are Little Haiti, Little Havana, Liberty City, Alapata, Overtown to an extent. These neighborhoods are historically of color. Black and brown folks inhabit these neighborhoods, and further than that, they are socioeconomically challenged. They've been historically disinvested in by the city until just recently. And what is unfortunate is that these neighborhoods are not only historically of color, they really are cultural epicenters that you cannot find, not only in other parts of the city or the county, but also in other parts of the nation.
We took the initiative to clean up our community. What makes up a community is the people, the land that they stand on, and between that, what they are able to create with each other. And if you look at that angle and you see that there's more people in terms of demographic moving into a community, and you're starting to see, because of the land itself that they're taking away, they're also changing the culture and the lives of these people. When you take the land, you take the nightclub that was here. You know, you take that, you take the daycare that was here. You know what I'm saying? You're taking something that's dear to them.
So the causes of gentrification are extremely complex, and it's hard at this point to make a determination of how much of an impact sea level rise is having on Miami's redevelopment pressure.
I don't think people are leaving Miami Beach to move to Alapata. To me, that would be the definition of climate gentrification, where people are migrating from a low-lying area, and by virtue of what they're expected to pay or what they were paying, they move into another area and affect the pricing. What's actually happening is Miami's growth is just driving people to those areas because they tend to be areas that are accessible to the employment centers, accessible to public transportation, and accessible to the other city infrastructure that's developed downtown at a lesser land cost or at a lesser development cost.
The city is undergoing a lot of development interest, right, in many parts of the city. There are areas of high elevation that are undergoing high development interest, but also lower lying areas along the Miami River that are just that next wave from downtown. We're tied for third as the fastest growing city in the country.
I don't think that developers are going out with a topographical map and say, I'd rather buy this site because it's 5 feet higher. I think that they look at the site specifics of development, and if they're in a low-lying area, they have to contemplate what design am I going to have to employ to be able to get the correct insurance rates and to be able to build this in a sustainable way. So I do think that developers are considering elevation in their decisions. I don't think they're seeking sites intentionally just because it's on the coastal ridge. I think the developers are actually just looking for larger tracts of land to do projects, and we're running out of truly vacant sites in the other areas of the city that you would normally purchase. So you either have to buy an existing building, be prepared to demolish it and redevelop it and so forth, or you can buy, for much cheaper, land in some of these outlying areas.
For me, it doesn't necessarily matter what the intention of a specific developer is. I think it's a clear fact that people are being gentrified out of their neighborhoods, and that if they're moving to an area that's more susceptible to sea level rise, that they're going to be more climate vulnerable, and that's what climate gentrification is. And I really believe that's what's happening in Miami-Dade County.
The climate gentrification resolution passed unanimously and was largely heralded as an innovative effort by the city. There was press coverage because there has been no other municipality that has committed to studying and understanding the issue. And so to me, that applause that we got figuratively comes with a sense of responsibility to then actually follow through.
We are acutely aware of the fact that in Miami, gentrification is an issue, and that said, it serves, in our opinion, no great purpose to focus exclusively on climate gentrification as such. It serves us best, us in the planning department and us in the city of Miami, to include climate gentrification as one component of all the gentrification forces that affect the city of Miami and tackle them as a whole. To go any further into simply trying to isolate the instances that are a result of climate gentrification would frankly be to go forward in a fool's errand. We miss the point if we don't tie it into all the other factors.
Given that it has been almost 1 year and we are no closer to having the intentional solutions that we wanted as a result of this resolution, I cannot say that the support is there to really make inroads on this issue in a timely fashion. I don't think that there is a lack of will to address the issue, but I think that there is a lack of understanding. And there is a lack of understanding just how pressing this is and just how pressing it could be if left unaddressed.
I think we're in the early stages of really assessing all the factors that attend and that influence gentrification generally, and I'm frankly not in favor of moving forward in a rushed fashion because there is much data out there that we need to obtain and we wouldn't want to miss to really inform good, sound policy long term. At least from the planning department standpoint, the long-term outlook is always the important thing.
And we don't really have years to waste. There are residents that are being displaced right now. There are neighborhoods that are being hyper-gentrified right now. And so we do need timely solutions, but the idea behind the resolution was to make sure that we have at least done the background research to make sure that those resolutions, those proposed solutions will be effective, and to make sure that they are surgery and not a Band-Aid on a stab wound.
Whether or not you believe in climate gentrification, gentrification is happening now, displacement is happening now. The people that have been in Miami for decades, that really have built this city and made the city what it is, can no longer afford to live here. They're looking at places like Broward and Orlando, and then when you add climate concerns on top of that, it doesn't help alleviate this at all. We need to really start up protecting our residents.
It's very easy to ignore this as being an issue, a poor people's issue, or a black and brown issue. But it's everybody's issue. This city is a beautiful place only because of the people that inhabit it. And so it's really on all of us to keep our city beautiful and to keep our city vibrant by keeping our city diverse and making sure that we are protecting those among us who have just historically been pushed around, who have historically been disenfranchised, oppressed, largely so that this city could become what it is today.
We need more investments from the government, and we also need more understanding from private sector that's coming here to understand what's going on with our community. It's not just Highland of Elevation, there's culture here, and there's beautiful people here. There's a strong force in terms of having to be resilient. I know there's a lot of IEC investors who are not selling. They've taken that decision to not just only sell, but to fight back to who they are, right? Not necessarily but fight back with saying this is our community, let's beautify it. So my vision and our vision for this community is a resilient one by thereafter we all still here. It's not one of a somber and people are gonna get washed out. And the fact that I'm here, that itself is such a strong statement to this community.
And joining me now to share more on climate gentrification and urban planning solutions is Dr. Keren Boulter, Senior Planner and Sea Level Rise Expert in Urban and Coastal Resiliency at the engineering and consulting firm Arcadis. Nice to have you with us, Keren. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pam. Great to be here.
All right, so talk about what you do for Arcadis.
So a lot of my work is about funding resilience, paying for these solutions. I work with a lot of local governments to develop FEMA applications and get in some federal dollars for preventative, pre-disaster mitigation. I also work with Arcadis to lead the Miami-Dade sea level rise strategy. And what's cool about that project is it's a business case. So we're modeling all these different approaches for what can we do 2060 with 2+ feet of sea level rise. What's the cost of doing everything? What's the cost of doing nothing? And then all these other options in between. Another project that I'm working on that I really love is we're working in coordination with the Florida Institute for Health Innovation on the CDC-funded Florida Hurricane Response Hub. And that's really focusing on capacity building for the public health workforce and also emergency responders. And we really are focusing on teaching them about climate change and really weaving in the health impacts of sea level rise and climate change. So we created this poster that we presented at the Climate Summit in Key West last week. And I was really surprised that there were a lot of doctors there and a lot of people focusing on health and wellness.
Yeah, people don't think about those other impacts related to climate change, such as health and wellness. So that's interesting. Talk about that climate summit, because the news that came out of that was things are happening faster than previously thought when it comes to rising sea level. So talk about that and that sense of, is that something you expected when you got that information? Because it's a bit alarming.
I wasn't surprised. Every 5 years, the compact updates their projection, and every year they go up a little bit more. I think that it's really hard to quantify. We know that the warming oceans are expanding, ice is melting, but how to actually, there's a lot of uncertainty. And there's tipping points. So things don't just happen in that curve going up. There's pulses, and that's the problem, is we have this false sense of security thinking, oh, it's a future thing, but then it comes out of nowhere. And really doing the preventative actions saves so much more money than reacting. So it makes sense, the business case, even without sea level rise, just because of storm surge and other flooding problems.
So talk about that whole business part of it, because you and I were talking earlier, and we saw in some of the pieces here that there are solutions, if you will, that could be stronger seawalls and raising roadways and the way we look at making our cities resilient. That all has a big fat price tag, right? So how do we get the funding to do those sorts of things? And that's something that you've worked on before, right? Because that's a really big piece of the puzzle. We come up with a plan, and then we need to fund it.
We need to pay for it. Yeah, and we're not going to be able to do everything. And that's what was really refreshing about the summit last week, because they really focused on specifics of what the problems were. There was a presentation from the city of Hollywood showing specific problems and what they were doing. Another one from Key West where they were showing all the roads underwater. So they're doing a whole study for all the roads in Key West, and they know they can't raise all of them, so they're looking at prioritizing. And there were some very dramatic photos. I mean, there was one point she said, that's not a canal, that's a road.
Wow.
So that's another really important thing, because we see things like 2100 or even 2060, you said 40 years,
Right.
but in reality, it's already happening today. The tidal range is more than 2 feet. So if you think about it, it's about high tide. It's about days per year and extreme events. What happens when there's high tide and storm surge and compound flooding,
Sure, we
compromised
deal with
drainage,
the king tides.
king
We've
tides.
seen it.
So it all
Yeah.
comes together to be catastrophic.
Talk about getting people to understand, because we've also talked about, and young people are very engaged. Let's talk about Greta Thunberg, from the Swedish teenager who's now on the cover of Time magazine as People of the Year for her awareness. And just talk about how they've also said, what's the term about something boomer?
Okay, boomer.
Okay, boomer, okay, boomer. Kind of alleging that the older generation just doesn't get it. So talk about that whole communication part of it. Are people getting the message that something needs to be done? And is it because they're seeing it happening in their community now with like king tides and flooding in Miami Beach, et cetera?
I think there's definitely an increased awareness because people are seeing what's happening now and they really experience those impacts, especially it's where they live in their community. But in terms of communicating the risk, it has to do with our perception of the risk, because we call them shocks and stressors. So a shock is like a hurricane. When Hurricane Irma came, a third of our state evacuated, right? Because we saw this huge thing on the TV headed towards our state and we had to get out. Versus sea level rise, it's creeping up a little bit every year. And when we see something that's kind of long term, it's not as terrifying. So people that have a 30-year mortgage, they're not leaving their house, even though they'll evacuate for Irma. So it has to do with the characteristics of something that's a slow process over time that we, as human beings, right, we put things off until it's really a problem.
It's right at your doorstep, basically.
Right, and that's going to be the most costly thing. Everything that we do, the sooner we do it, the more money we're going to save in the long run, the more people we're going to be able to protect, the more infrastructure we're going to be able to save.
Talk about solutions, because a lot of people, and you're very optimistic. We talked about this earlier, and a lot of people they hear the news and they get afraid, they get scared, they say, when do I have to sell my house? And you say, you know what, I have a positive outlook, I think we can solve this. So
I definitely have a positive outlook. I don't like to deliver bad messages. I don't like to scare people. I just want everyone to be prepared and to know their risk. And you can do a lot of things to understand what your risk is. A lot of people think, oh, Florida's going to be underwater, I'll be dead by then. They don't realize that there's a ridge, there's a coastal ridge, there's a lot of high areas that one of the cheapest solutions is land use changes. We shouldn't be developing in high risk areas. Right now, like Dr. Rennie was saying, the insurance rates haven't caught up. They're being subsidized for these low-lying areas, and once that kind of evens out, I mean, a mortgage, the mortgage is 30 years, but your insurance company can drop you every year.
Sure.
So
a big event, a big disaster, and they can say that's it, it's too costly.
Right. So these solutions, I think they need to be cost-effective. We need to look at the business case and really prioritize what's the most important and really get everyone on board. So there's a lot of tools out there. We were talking about Flood IQ or the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer. Just go in there, do some research,
see what your
look
risk
at your
is.
neighborhood. You might not even be in a flood zone. You might not even be in a storm surge area.
Right.
So there's a lot you can do to understand your risk, and then also communicating, talking to everyone, because really, like Greta's doing, all these protests.
Get it out there.
Yeah, it's really What's really going to cause a shift is a movement.
Right. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. And thank you so much for joining us. We hope you'll join us again next month for our brand new episode of Your South Florida. Take care.